Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast, hosted by Kristen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey y'all, welcome to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. I am so glad that you are listening today. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. If this is your first time listening, I just want to say welcome. I'm glad you're here. I hope you come back for more. Be sure to listen to the end of every episode. That's where we have the kids only segment where kids just like you get to be on the podcast. Well, I want to just encourage you today that if this episode means something to you, or if you really enjoy it with your family, I hope you will take some time to share it with someone else. Maybe if you're on social media, you can post about it or text it to a friend and let them know that you listen to the Collide Kids podcast. It's really a great way to let someone else know that you're thinking about them and help other people find out about the show. Well, today's episode, we're going to be meeting a book author, and she's written a fantastic book called The Size of Everything. And so before we get to her book, I wanted to play a little game with you guys. Is that okay if we play a game? We don't get to do that all the time, but today I thought would be a great day to play a game called What's Bigger? So I'm going to give you two options and you're going to tell me which one is bigger. Now, I guess you can't really tell me personally because I can't hear you. I wish I could, but you can tell the people that are around you. So if you're in the car with someone else or you're in your house with other people, you can play along together and just pause it before I give the answer so that everyone can choose which one they think is bigger. So here we go. This is the game called What's Bigger? The first option, a queen size bed or a king size bed. Which one is bigger? Well, if you guessed king size bed, you are correct. King size beds are about 16 inches wider, so they're a little bit bigger than those queen size beds. All right, next one. What's bigger, a quart or a pint? Ooh, that's a measurement one. Which one? Well, if you guessed quart, you are correct. A quart is 32 ounces. A pint is only 16. All right, here's the next one. What's bigger, an alligator or a crocodile? I always thought they were the same animal, but they're actually different. Which one's bigger, an alligator or a crocodile? Well, if you guessed crocodile, you are correct. Crocodiles can actually grow up to 20 feet. That's pretty long. That's crazy. All right, here's the next one. What's bigger, the state of Alaska or the state of Texas? Oh, both are really big. Which one is bigger? If you guessed Alaska, you are correct. Alaska is over 665,000 square miles, whereas Texas is only 268 square miles. That's pretty big too, but Alaska's a lot bigger. All right, here's the next one. What's bigger, a grain of pollen or a white blood cell? Well, if you guessed a white blood cell, you're correct. A white blood cell is what helps your body fight diseases, and it is 25 macrons, whereas a grain of pollen is only 15 microns. That's pretty fascinating. All right, here's the next one. What's bigger, a bluebird or a blue jay? Sounds like the same thing, but it's not. Well, if you guessed blue jay, you are correct. Blue jays are typically between 10 and 12 inches, whereas bluebirds are between 6 and 8 inches. So just a little bit bigger, but both are beautiful birds. Here's the next one. What's bigger, a grapefruit or a coconut? If you guess coconut, you are correct. It can get up to 8 inches in diameter, where a grapefruit gets only up to 6 inches in diameter. Those are both pretty big and delicious. All right, here's the next one. What's bigger, a tiger or a lion? Both are really big cats. Which one's the biggest? Well, if you guessed tiger, you are correct. Tigers actually are bigger, longer, and way more than a lion. Isn't that interesting? All right, here's the last one. What's bigger, an ant or a fruit fly? Well, if you guessed an ant, you are correct. An ant can get up to 25 millimeters, whereas a fruit fly can only get up to 3 millimeters. Isn't that so interesting? All the amazing things that God has created. Well, I am so excited to talk more about this with our guest today. Her name is Alyssa Clements, and she is a third grade teacher who turned into an author and book editor and loves learning about the fascinating world God has created and exploring how it all points back to Him. She recently published her first book, The Size of Everything, which is an interactive faith and science book for kids. Alyssa lives in West Chicago, Illinois, with her husband, Forrest, and her two wonderfully curious children. You guys are going to love this conversation all about faith and science. Here is my conversation with Alyssa Clements. Alyssa, I am so excited to have you on the Collide Kids podcast today.
I'm so excited to be here, Kristen.
Yeah, this is awesome. I love talking with authors, and I think it's so interesting what you're going to share with us today. Would you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. I'm an author. I wrote a children's science book that came out in September called The Size of Everything. And before that, I was a children's book editor. I've also been a third grade teacher. And I'm also a mom of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So living with my husband and our 2 kids in West Chicago, Illinois.
That's awesome. I love that. So we're going to talk about your book because I'm really excited to learn about the size of everything. But before we do that, because this is a show for kids, I always make my guests tell me a really good joke. So do you have a joke for us today?
I do have a joke. It's a science joke.
Okay.
So it's, why can you never trust an atom? An atom as an atom, not like Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Why can you never trust an atom?
You know that guy, Adam. Okay. Why can you never trust an atom?
Because they make up everything.
That's true. They do make up everything.
Yeah. So for listeners who maybe don't know what an atom is, atoms are little tiny building blocks that make up everything in the world. God used them to create everything, you know, a table, a chair, you. Everything is made up of tiny, tiny atoms.
Yes, that's so, and so they do make up everything. That's so good. I like that joke. That's a good one. Well, let's talk a little bit about first how you got started as a third grade teacher. How long did you teach?
I taught for 4 years at a Christian classical school.
Awesome. What was it about teaching that made you want to do that?
Yeah, I had always wanted to be a teacher ever since I was really little. I think I just loved my teachers growing up. I loved to learn, and I had some teachers who invested in me. Like, I think of my 5th grade teacher who would let me make posters for our 5th grade classroom and things like that. And I feel like that was something from a young age. It was like, oh, I want to do that. I love my teachers. I want to be like them. So I went to school for teaching and for English, which is kind of funny how God has used that. I never expected to use my literature degree. It was kind of part of the teaching thing.
Yeah.
But then God has used it to help me be an author too. So it's fun.
That's really cool. I love hearing stories like that because, you know, I always say God doesn't waste anything. So sometimes we might make a decision or do something, or we're in a circumstance and we're like, why did I have to go through that? Or why did I choose that? And then later we're like, oh, that's why. So God uses all the things that he has in our life. I think that's really cool. So you were a 3rd grade teacher and then you decided to go into publishing. Tell us a little bit about your job in publishing and what that looks like.
So I was working on the kids publishing team at Tyndale, and my job was basically to look at manuscripts from other authors and decide kind of what we wanted to publish and help contribute to that. So I was reading manuscripts, and another part of my job was also to be aware of what books were out there already and kind of see where the holes were, where there might be opportunities for new books that would reach kids for Christ. So that's kind of where this book came from, is I saw a hole, and it was just kind of being in the right place at the right time and having an opportunity to pitch something, which is really fun.
Yeah. So did you pitch it to yourself, or was there someone else on your team?
I mean, I kind of kept it to myself for a little bit and tried to write it, figure out it was started as an idea and actually as a lesson that I used to do with my 3rd graders. So it was something where I was like, I know that kids would like this, but could this work as a book?
Yeah.
And so I tried to write it out myself. And the more that I kind of worked on it, it was like, oh, I think maybe I should talk to some people and see if this could be a real thing. And so ended up like officially pitching it internally. And, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I never expected to be an author, but God was just kind of prompting me like, take a chance, take a risk, like see if this could be a thing. And I'm just really grateful that, the decision makers at Tyndale got behind it and caught the vision.
Yeah. So tell us about your book. It's called The Size of Everything. What is it about?
Yeah, it's a science book that mainly focuses on like the size of things that God has created in the world. And so it's a little bit unique in that it starts in the middle with the size of an 8-year-old. So I really wanted kids to be able to open it up and think, okay, I know how big I am, right? Before we start talking about bigger and smaller things that are so much bigger and so much smaller, like I know how big I am. And then it also talks about like how God has created us as people in his image to glorify him, to be in a relationship with him, do his work in the world. And then from there, as you flip the pages to the left, then things get progressively smaller from the size of you, all the way down to like the very smallest things that God's made. If you flip the pages to the right, things get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, all the way up to the very biggest things. And I found when I was teaching, so actually the school that I taught at had kind of a unique curriculum in that I taught astronomy to my students all year long instead of doing like all sorts of different science. We only did astronomy. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of the year, before we started talking about, just how big the planets were and the stars and all of these things, I was like, we have to kind of talk about, orient them in order for them to realize like just how big these things are. And so I would do this lesson that would kind of gradually like lead us up. So that's kind of similar to how the book works, with wanting to kind of blow kids' minds a little bit and be like, wow, like God is so cool and these things are so big and so small, but like he has made them all and he knows exactly how they work, and how much more does he know and see us as his like best creation, right?
Yeah, that's so encouraging. So tell us, what's the smallest thing that the book talks about?
Yeah, so the smallest thing is a quark, which is actually these tiny, tiny things that are inside of atoms. So atoms are those building blocks. And then actually, like, an adult body has 7 octillion atoms.
Whoa.
Which that's like, octillion would be a 7 followed by 27 zeros. I don't know if you can, like, even imagine that.
Wow.
So, like, that's, like, so many. But even smaller than that, inside of each of those are these tiny little quarks that we can't see, and we only know that they exist through like scientists shoot atoms together, smash them together, and little quarks pop out and they can like see them on computers. So it's just crazy,
Wow.
How small these things are, but like God sees them and he made them perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the smallest thing. What's the biggest thing?
So the biggest thing is called the Boss Great Wall, which I just love that that's the name of it. It actually...
That's a good name.
But Boss Great Wall, and it's this huge group of galaxies in space that's like kind of held together by gravity, and so scientists like call it the biggest thing. But what blows my mind is that our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, isn't even in it. Like, we're not even close to it.
Oh, wow.
So, like, this biggest thing is way out in space. Like, how huge is this universe that God has made that this biggest thing isn't even near us?
Yeah. Okay, that's so interesting. It is hard to wrap your mind around these things that are so big, because a lot of times we just think about the things we can see, but there's so much out there that we don't know about. What's something that stood out to you as you were creating this book or putting this lesson together that really helped your faith or helped your relationship with God?
Yeah, I think that just as we see the intricacy and like as you start diving into more of these things, you see just how cool they are. Yeah. Like how much creativity God has put into them. Like you say, like, wow, that's so cool. But really, your heart kind of moves to, wow, like God is so cool. And so as we look at these things, we don't look at them just by themselves. We see in the Bible that God gave us these things, gave us creation to point our hearts towards him, not like just to know about in themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. So were you interested in science as a kid? Like, is that how you got excited about this? Or was it something that sparked this later in life?
teaching really sparked it for me. Like, we were outside a lot as a kid, so I loved to be in nature, doing stuff outside. I get a lot of energy just from, going to the park with my kids and going for a walk and doing things outside in creation. But I think from teaching, especially astronomy, my kids just loved it. Like, my students loved astronomy. And seeing their excitement for it made me want to teach it and made me want to learn more on my own so that I could bring it into the classroom and hear them be like, whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, I feel like it was both of us together, like kind of exploring what God has made. That has made it really exciting to me.
Yeah, that's so cool. Kids are good like that, right? They get us excited about, we're like, we should be more excited about this.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me this, how does science and faith go together? Like, how do they fit together? Because I feel like that's something that we hear a lot in the world is that, these are two things that are separate. Like, faith is separate and science is separate. But I think you really have touched on the fact that they really go together. So how does that work? We'll be right back after this. Raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
Yeah, I think the Bible has actually a lot to say about this. I mean, the word science isn't used, but the Bible talks about creation so many times. It's just throughout the Bible. So I think going back to Genesis 1, we see God creating everything. He speaks it and it happens. It comes into being, everything in the world, including us, right? So he makes all of these things and says that they're good, and he makes us and he says that we're very good. And so we see him as the creator of everything. And then I think also just in the Psalms, I think of Psalm 19 about the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they display knowledge. And just this idea that as we look at creation, we see God. It is pouring forth knowledge about who he is and what he's done in the world and his character. I also think of Jesus, right? Jesus used creation in his teachings. In the Sermon on the Mount, he's talking about, don't worry. And he's telling all the people who are listening, don't worry about your life. God cares for you. And he uses creation. He says, look at the birds of the air. Look at the flowers. Look at how they don't have to work. The birds don't have to work and worry about food. God provides for them. Mm-hmm. And look at the flowers and look at how beautiful they are. And God clothes them. And so just this idea of look at creation and therefore be reminded of who God is and that he cares for you and what his character is. Mm-hmm. And I also think one other passage that I think is important as we think about how these two go together is Colossians 1. So there's a section in Colossians 1 that talks about how everything in creation holds together in Jesus. That he was there at the beginning, it all was created in him and through him, and he holds it all together. So as we study science, there's a lot of things that we can learn and a lot of ways that we see things clearly, but there also are a lot of questions. I feel like the more that I study science, the more questions I have, not the more answers. And so Colossians 1 is basically saying, that's okay. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to not understand how it all fits together because we trust, right? At the end of the day, we're trusting that God is the one who's holding it all together. It all makes sense to him. There's nothing we're ever going to learn in science that's going to be a surprise to him or is somehow going to, contradict him or how it all works. So I think there's a lot of freedom, too, in being able to, eagerly study science, but also at the end of the day be we're going to be left with a lot of things we don't know. And that's okay. That strengthens our faith in trusting who God is and that we know that he's behind it all and holding it all together.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing too, that there's so much that we know, about science, about our anatomy of our bodies and astronomy and all the things that we're learning. And still, there's so much that we don't know. There's still unexplored places on our planet and in the galaxies that we just don't even know about. And so I think you're right. Like that verse you said, the heavens pour forth knowledge. It's just, there's so much out there that we still can discover. So I'm thinking about some kids that are listening right now that are like, I really like STEM or science at my school, and I love learning about this stuff. So what would you say to those kids who love science? What should they do next?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's so much that we can do to learn about the world that God has made. And I think as long as we're starting with that framework of like, God is the one who created, God is the one who holds it all together, we can learn about him, then there's just a lot of freedom and like exploring. So getting outside, I think, is something that is great, just trying to be observant, wherever you are. There's so much that you can observe about the world God's made, looking at the sky, looking at the leaves, look at all those interesting colors in that leaf. Like, isn't God so creative in what he's done there? I think asking questions, not being afraid to like talk about it with your family, ask Alexa, ask Google, questions that you have, or go to the library, just to kind of go down those rabbit trails and know that there are things that we can learn about God and his world. I think reading nonfiction books is something that is really great. I think nonfiction books are really great for kids who love to read, but also kids who maybe don't love to read. There's pictures and you can kind of come at them however you want. You don't have to read from start to finish. You can pick it up and read one page and then come back to it later.
Yeah.
So Christian nonfiction books, non-Christian nonfiction books, there's a lot that we can learn about God's creation, if we hold that framework in the back of our minds, like knowing that God created everything and that he holds it all together before we go into it. And then just trying to, we can go to aquariums, we can go to different children's museums or science museums. A lot of libraries actually have like free passes that you can check out. I know the libraries around us do. So that would be something worth checking out if your library has any sort of program where you can check out museum memberships. But do experiments. There are a bunch of books out there that have fun experiments that you can do that most of the time will just lead you to more questions, more things that you can research, more things that you can learn about. So just being curious. I think there are a lot of different ways that we can approach it without working too hard, and I think for parents too, like trying to do that with your family, sometimes it can feel a little daunting of like, it's just like one more thing to like do with my kids is now I have to teach them science. And it's like, well, kids have a lot of questions naturally, and I think there are lots of opportunities throughout your day without you adding anything new to just, if they ask a question, taking it seriously and digging a little bit deeper. That can provide a lot of opportunities without adding another thing.
Yeah, that's so true. I love that. Yes, being curious is so good, and kids are very good at being curious. So keep doing that and keep asking those questions. I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing about all of this today. I'm excited for our readers to learn about your book. Where can they find your book?
At most retailers. So it's published through Tyndale, but you can find it on Amazon, Target, Walmart, different places. So you can just go look for it.
All right. So you guys go check out The Size of Everything. I think that's going to be a great book for any of your kids that are curious or interested in science. They're going to love it. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. Before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests to share a memory from when they were a kid. So do you have a memory you want to share with us today?
I do. Yeah, I had said that I grew up kind of being outside a lot. I grew up in Northern California, kind of in a valley, but it was about an hour to get, you go over the mountains to get to the ocean. So my grandparents lived over by the ocean, and we would go and visit them a lot growing up and go to the aquarium. They had like tide pools by their house that we would go explore and look for sea otters and stuff like that. But my grandparents tell a story about me being like 3 or 4. So I don't remember it, but it has become like a family story about how we were at the beach and one time a seagull, I guess, came up and took the cheese out of my sandwich and ate it while I was holding it. So I guess wasn't interested in the whole sandwich, but just my cheese. And so I just think that's funny, you know, thinking about the beach and I don't know, the funny creatures that God has made.
Yes.
That,
And that's the best part of the sandwich is the cheese. So
of course.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
left me with the bread and whatever else.
That's great. I love that. Wow. Now I'm going to be more cautious around seagulls whenever I'm eating a sandwich, right? Well, Alyssa, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was great. And I loved getting to meet you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Wasn't that so cool? I love learning about science and I love all the different things that she had to share with us and how unique to read a book that you're supposed to start in the middle. You work your way from the middle out so you can go out to see what's bigger than you or to see what's smaller than you. So interesting. And there's so much in between the size of you and the smallest thing, which she said was a quark, and the biggest thing, which was a great boss wall. That's so amazing. I love when she said that as we look at creation, we see God. The more we learn about the world and what he's made, the more it points to him. Creation is pouring out knowledge of who God is and his character, and he is behind it all and he's holding it all together. Isn't that so comforting to know that? And I loved her encouragement for all of our friends who are really interested in science and STEM. The best ways for you to grow and learn more about science is just to keep being curious, ask questions, read lots of nonfiction books, go to aquariums or museums, and you can even find some fun experiments to try with adults' permission, of course. But always stay curious. That's the best way to be a good scientist. If you'd like to check out Alyssa's book, The Size of Everything, you can find that on Amazon or christianbook.com or Walmart or wherever you get your books. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. So here is my friend, Maggie Jane.
Hi, my name is Maggie Jane, and this is my joke. How do you get a squirrel to like you? You act like a nut.
Well, if that's true, then I should have a lot of squirrel friends because I am a nut. Thank you, Maggie Jane, for sending that in. Hey, if you would like to be like Maggie Jane and share your favorite joke or an encouraging quote that you like from a book or a movie, or maybe you have a song or a favorite Bible verse you want to share, just head over to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and click the tab at the top that says Kids Only, and you can find everything you need to record it right there, or you can send it to me through my social media. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod, and I would love for you to follow me there. There are so many ways that you can support the podcast, but the best way you can do that is by sharing it with someone else and letting them know why you like to listen. You can also leave a rating and a review. That's a great way to let other people know that you enjoy the show as well. And I always appreciate your prayer support. Well, I am so glad that you chose to listen today, and I hope you find some time this week to think about all the amazing things that God has created and spend some time wondering about those and asking questions and searching on Google and learning more about the things that God has created. And in case no one has told you today, I would love to be the first to remind you that God loves you so very much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids podcast.